Hi, and welcome to a discussion of political ideologies using our two-spectrum analysis. The left-right spectrum, which deals with economic freedom and economic equality, and the up-down spectrum, which deals with authoritarianism slash collectivism towards the top, and individualism or libertarianism, that's social libertarianism now, on the bottom. Let's just kind of go through these different parties that are set out on the grid or these different ideologies and explain why they ended up where they are. So let's start with conservatism, just to the upper right quadrant. It's to the right, and this is, we'll keep American parties in mind unless specified otherwise. The American conservative movement is on the right because it's more free market than liberals or Democrats in the U.S. It believes that businesses should be less regulated and that taxes on individuals should be lower, thus giving them more freedom to do what they want to with their money. But potentially the trade-off there is that you have a more unequal society. So that puts the conservatives to the right of the spectrum. In terms of the collectivist, individualist spectrum, conservatives are generally towards the top, or at least somewhat to the top, not all that far really, because conservatives tend to dislike change, and that's kind of a definition of what it is to be conservative. When you dislike change, you tend to respect authority and want continuation with previous modes of either of governance or of authority. So you're less questioning of authority. You're more inclined to value what your group has done in the past. So, for instance, a lot of this may be reflected in religiousness. Conservatives tend to be more religious than, say, liberals in the U.S., which goes along with their appearance towards, in the upper half of the spectrum, because that's tied in with respecting traditional religious authorities. It's the individual is subservient to, say, the religious group. You could see the same thing in the military. The military is more conservative than a lot of other sectors of society, for instance, academia. And that you can note that the individual in the military is very much subservient to the needs of the group. In the yellow box just below conservatism, liberalism is, we say liberalism here, not in the sense that it's used in modern American politics, but in the classic European sense of the liberals of, say, the 19th century wanted a decreased role for the monarch throughout Europe. They wanted more political and economic freedoms in a lot of ways. So they're on the right because they wanted, say, more free trade, which gives economic freedoms potentially at the expense of equality. Although, I guess technically that just depends on how you view it. And they also wanted less structured obedience to traditional authorities, like, say, the nobility. They wanted, the common persons, or at least the educated middle-class person, to have more say in government. So more kind of individual expression in many ways. To the left, in the pink, the social democracy square. You could equate this with, to some extent, with Democrats in modern U.S. politics, or in the UK, say, with the Labour Party, in Germany with the Social Democratic Party. The Social Democrats are somewhat on the left because they are more redistributive in terms of their policies. In general, say, American Democrats would support higher taxes on individuals, which would decrease economic freedom, but would support the redistribution of that money in ways that would kind of make people a little more equal. So, for instance, universal health care is that type of thing that Democrats in the U.S. have pushed for. Other policies like, say, SNAP programs, which gives food to less well-off children, that kind of thing. The Social Democrats tend to be on the bottom half of the spectrum towards individualism, because they are less inclined to support traditional authority. They are less inclined to obey traditional religious authorities. Which means Democrats, very often are less religious, say, than Republicans in the U.S. They're less inclined, Social Democrats, to be in the military, another bastion of kind of authority as opposed to individualism. Above them, you have the populists, which not necessarily a very broad group in the U.S., but you could think of, say, Hugo Chavez, former leader of Venezuela. He was authoritarian in that he was only kind of semi-democratic. That is, he would allow votes, which he would basically win, but at the same time he would clamp down on independent voices and subjugate individual expression to the interests of the government, and, well, as it was him as the leader of the government. But at the same time, Hugo Chavez was very redistributive. He would nationalize companies, say oil companies or communications companies, and with this money, or with the proceeds from these companies, he would build more of a social structure that would say look after the less well off, make sure that there's universal health care, these other type things that are more about economic equality than economic freedom. Going above the populists to the nationalists. The nationalists are even more intense about following authority. In this case, the authority is the race or the ethnicity or the government, which does not leave a lot of place for, say, ethnic minorities. You could think about nationalists in, say, the former Yugoslavia after it broke up in the 1990s. Say, a lot of the smaller ethnic groups in the former Yugoslavia wanted to subjugate the interests of individuals, maybe of different ethnic groups, to the ideals or the idea of the ethnic group they were a part of. Fascism is somewhat related to nationalism in that it involves an extreme, an even more extreme kind of obliteration of the individual in favor of the group. If you remember, fascist ideology, it treats the nation or the state almost like a living being, and the interests of the individuals are entirely, subsumed or are entirely subservient to the state. That's why fascists, arrest people who say disagree with the government. They send them to re-education camps. They kill them. All these people who try to, express any kind of individual thing that's not sanctioned by the government. The upper levels of fascism is getting into truly totalitarian political ideology, which is when the government or the state basically controls everything. Now, fascism is not necessarily on the as far right as you can get in the left-right spectrum, even though, commonly when we're just talking about a single left-right spectrum, as we usually, as say CNN would, fascism is considered the far right. Stalinism/communism would be considered the far left. But on the two-spectrum thing, we got to keep in mind that under fascist governments, there are traditionally some curbs to capitalism, some curbs to the free market. The government controls, the government either controls or has influence over a lot of the commanding heights of the economy, so heavy industry or railroads or that kind of thing. But in where there is a true authoritarian regime combined with absolute capitalism, then you have what's known as iron fist capitalism. And I actually can't really think of any iron fist capitalist governments off the top of my head. You find out and tell me. But circling down clockwise, we have the economic libertarians on the right, but generally kind of on the bottom part of the spectrum. Economic libertarians believe that basically all economic acts should be allowed. There should be no curbs on what the individual or what businesses want to do with their money, or economically speaking. But at the same time, that idea of economic libertarianism usually goes hand in hand with a distaste for bowing to authority. So the economic libertarians would like very low taxes, but at the same time, they're inclined to support the government being hands-off in terms of social ideas, say prohibiting freedom of expression, controlling activities that are often controversial, like possession of guns or access to abortion, that kind of thing. Circling on farther down, you have at the very bottom you have the anarchists, and anarchists could really float all the way across the bottom, because when you are a complete libertarian or a complete individualist, you basically believe that all forms of authority are coercion, and all coercion is illegitimate. So you believe in no rules and no structures of authority. That's the exact opposite of totalitarianism. But anarchists might have different approaches to the level of economic equality they seek. The problem being is that as an anarchist, you're kind of caught in a catch-22. Since you don't really believe in government and authority, how are you going to enforce any kind of economic equality? So it's tough. Above the anarchists are the Greens. And this is more a stronger party in Europe than in the U.S. certainly. Greens are very much individualist. They believe in individual expression, socially speaking. They tear down the patriarchy, destroy old authorities. Although at the same time, if we take our authoritarian libertarian spectrum seriously, if we're being rigorous about it, those aspects of green ideology, for instance, controls over business activity that has an environmental impact, things like that, that does nudge green ideology a little bit higher on the authoritarian libertarian spectrum than I feel like it shows on this chart. But that's okay. Moving to the left of the Greens, you have the Socialists. Very much on the left of the left-right scale, the Socialists believe in serious economic equality, and in Marxist socialism definitely sees this period of time as a class war between the proletarian classes, the proletariat on the one hand, and the bourgeoisie on the other. So that there's a violent push for equality as opposed to economic freedom. However, there are a range of different ways that Marxists or that socialists over the years have argued that socialism can or should come about, and some are more authoritarian, do involve a lot more deference of the individual to the needs of the group. And probably Marxist socialism, at least in the socialist phase, there may well be, say, a dictatorship of the proletariat. So the socialism box, the Marxist part of that, may well extend a good deal up our spectrum. However, you also have, say, agrarian socialists who believe that socialism will occur relatively spontaneously, naturally, without any kind of pressure or force involved. And those socialists are more at the bottom of the socialism rectangle here. To the left of them, you have communists who push for or believe in even greater economic equality, total economic equality, and they span a decent amount of the vertical spectrum for the same reason that the socialists do. Above the communists, when communism or socialism heads all the way to the top of the authoritarian libertarian spectrum, there you have Stalinism, which was in practice a totalitarian government where the state created heaps of bodies of people who tried to express themselves, express their individuality, who did not get with the program and follow along with what the state was trying to do, which to the Stalinist state was radically redistributive in terms of economics. So it does deserve its place on the far left, and the totalitarian aspects are what buy it its place on the very top. So hopefully this has cleared up some of the issues involved with placing different ideologies in different places, and if you have any questions, just ask.